Right, if there's ever an episode that people are going to want to hang on to because they think I'm going to drop the silver bullet solution, it's our episode on assets. Because surely there's something we can invest in that's going to be amazing, that's going to create all of this wealth for the future. And because James is a professional and they manage $150 million plus worth of assets, they must know exactly what to do and exactly where to put it. So if you're hanging out for that, thank you for joining in, but I hate to disappoint you. I'm not going to tell you the perfect asset because no such bloody thing exists.
Think of life as an epic game. Let's make sure you're playing to win every step of the way. Live big. Plan bigger. You're now listening to Wealth Hunters.
That's just not a thing. What is important around assets is that we actually understand what assets actually are. Because fundamentally, if we don't get that bit right, nothing else matters. Okay. So first of all, an asset is something that we can utilize that provides some sort of residual benefit to us. We get a bit confused about this as lay people because when you fill out your assets and liabilities for a bank loan or something, you put your car in as an asset on the assets column. The sheer reality is for most people, your car is not an asset, it's a liability. It costs you money. It very rarely makes you money. You might have a classic car which appreciates in value over time. You could be an Uber driver, in which case, yes, your car is an asset because that asset is fundamental in you creating an income. But if you are a regular Joe and you happen to have a Datsun 120Y, it's probably a classic car now. You probably have some sort of vehicle sitting in the driveway. It's not an asset. So let's start with that. But how do we think about assets? Well, people will say things like, oh, well, your house is your biggest asset in your lifetime. Your super is your biggest asset. And most people will equate the super to being an asset. But again, remember from one of our previous discussions, the super is usually just a brand. It's not specifically an asset. It's what you've done with the money inside the super that buys the asset. The asset is the thing that makes the money over time. A lot of people think about their super as an asset, as a pizza, right? And the whole point of the pizza is that it comes in 8 slices and we want to buy a pizza for $5 in the hope that tomorrow people want pizzas for $10 so we can sell off those slices, realize that money, then take that money and go and buy another pizza. Go and buy a $10 pizza in 8 slices. Hope that eventually that $10 pizza is going to be worth $20. Sell that whole pizza and keep trying to trade our way to wealth. That whole Jordan Belfort, Wolf of Wall Street stuff, right? That's the sexy part of investment, isn't it? Where we can buy and sell our way to wealth. We can sell those pizzas, buy those pizzas and transact on them. Why? So eventually when we get to retirement, we can take those slices and eat them until there's no pizza left. That's the way most people think about assets most of the time. I think that's bullshit. I think that doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. And the second we start treating assets like a divisible pizza that we're going to trade our way through and eventually eat all the pieces until there's nothing left is absolutely nuts, right? So we don't think of assets like pizzas. We think of assets like chickens. And our purpose is not to have the highest value chicken we can find. Our purpose is to own the most number of chickens we possibly can over time. Now, why chickens? Well, chickens are great because chicken tastes pretty good if you want to kill the chicken. But chickens also lay eggs. And those eggs are fantastic because those eggs give us options. We can take the eggs that are laid from those chickens and we can eat the eggs and leave the chickens alone. And if we can't eat the eggs, like in superannuation where you can't access it until you're retired, what could we do with the eggs? We can exchange them for more chickens. Fantastic. And as that cycle continues, then our purpose is not to continue to buy and sell chickens because at the end of the day, what when we're wrong? What when the chicken market goes to a point where we picked the wrong chickens? We picked the wrong assets. We're in the global financial crisis and some of those chickens were property trusts and mortgage funds, etc., that no longer exist anymore, killing the chicken. We don't do that. We want to go and buy these chickens that lay these eggs, buying more chickens in a diversified way. And diversification, well, that's one of those buzzwords, right, that you'll hear about a lot in investments. All diversification means is we want to own as many different types of chickens as possible over time so that we can go through different types of risk and not be affected overall. Why that's really important is, again, when you think about superannuation, let's say you do take an interest in your super, okay? And maybe most people might look at their super once a year, and that's fine, okay? That's okay. That's pretty standard from the people that I see. Those who do have an interest will often look at the super once a year. When do they look at it? When the annual statement comes. Now, here's the thing that is really interesting. When people look at that super statement and they're looking at how their asset has done in that 12-month period, there are 3 columns they could possibly look at to ascertain how well it's done. The first and most obvious column is they go straight to the dollar value. How much is the super worth today compared to what it was worth last year? And that automatically makes them either feel good or bad about how the super has actually performed. Then, if they're a little bit clearer, they'll go to the performance return. They'll go to the percentage return and say, right, well, if I can't work out that it was $100,000 last year and it's $110,000 this year, it's gone up by 10%. Well, they'll go straight to the percentage column to work out whether they're in a better or worse position as a result of the last 12 months. But the third and most important marker for how well you've performed in the last 12 months, particularly if you're young and have time ahead of you, they don't look at all. And that is, how many chickens do I own? Because here's a hypothetical for you. Is it possible for you to be in a better position today than you were 12 months ago if the value of your chickens has gone from $100,000 to $90,000? I'm going to argue it is absolutely possible for you to be better off today as a result of that if the value of those chickens has gone down in the short term. How? Well, you've had those eggs laid throughout the course of that 12-month period. You've been working and having super contributions going into your superannuation. You were willing to buy those chickens up here for $1 each, and now they're 90 cents each in the short term. Why? Because chicken markets go up and down in value all the time. Just because you happen to be in a 12-month period where the value of those chickens has decreased doesn't necessarily mean that you're in a worse position. In fact, it's quite possible that as those super contributions were going in, as those eggs were being laid and buying more chickens, you actually ended up buying more chickens in that 12-month period with your money than you would have bought had the market gone up in value. Why? Because the assets have dropped in value over time. And it's possible, probable, that you own more assets at the end of that 12-month period, albeit, yes, the value of those in the short term is less. So what? It doesn't matter, right? And getting fixated on the value as a marker of how well your super performs is really, really dangerous. Okay, because what ends up happening is that you could end up then saying, well, hang on a second, I checked it and the value's gone down, so I must have done badly. So I'm now going to take that asset, sell it at a low point and go and try and jump onto something else. Because when you're in the tea room or the break room or you're talking to your mate at a barbecue and you compare notes and he says to you, well, mine went up by $2,000, and you go, well, hang on, mine dropped by $10,000. And all of a sudden, if that's all the information you've got, you think, well, his must be better. Maybe it's not. First of all, we have to go back to purpose, time frame, and what is it? Okay. Secondly, we have to analyze the strategy and the tactics, but then we look at the actual overall asset and we don't even have a proper side-by-side benchmark to make that comparison. So if you are only using the short-term value of your assets as a measure of how well you're performing, you're going to be causing yourself some major grief, because those are the sorts of things that cause people to want to jump from one thing to another, capitalizing or crystallizing losses, for example, trying to chase returns. And there is no quicker way to burn your capital than to move from one thing to another trying to chase returns. And that's exactly why we have to think about these platforms, super, personal investments, property, rental properties, whatever, as a living, breathing organism. Our job is to nurture that organism and help it to multiply and expand, because he who dies with the most toys wins. The more assets you own, the greater your wealth creation potential over time, not the value of any one asset. I mean, think about this will probably go live for many years to come. At the time of recording this, there are massive, massive fires raging through Los Angeles right now. There are people in Los Angeles who have got these properties worth, in inverted commas, $5 million, $10 million, $15 million, okay, in one property. Now, admittedly, most of those people who have those properties have got lots and lots of money. They've probably got lots and lots of properties. But if you had a regular property in Palisades and it was worth $2 million and you had all of your capacity tied up in that one asset, and that asset burns to the ground and the insurer doesn't want to pay, you have nothing. And that's where it has very little to do with trying to find the asset that looks like it's worth the most or could be worth the most at any given time, and rather owning more assets that could grow themselves out over time. And that's the big distinction. So it's not about jumping onto the absolute winner or the silver bullet and saying, right, we're going to, this is going to be worth a lot of money in 10, 15, 20 years' time. That is an absolutely foolish way to go and do this. The better process is to say, right, what group of assets can I purchase that are so diversified that they can withstand the risks, which we'll talk about in another episode, that are going to meet my purpose, my time frame, and I can actually understand what on earth I've actually got. So treat your assets like chickens, not like a pizza. They are a living, breathing organism that are going to lay eggs. We have choices with those eggs as to what we do. And just to make that analogy clearer, if you have a property chicken, then the chicken is the property, the eggs are the rent. If you have a share chicken or a managed fund chicken or an index fund chicken, then the chickens are the underlying shares that you have purchased. And of course, the dividends on those shares are the egg. If you have a cash asset, then typically the chicken is the cash and the interest earned on that is the eggs. So the analogy runs itself out across the three main assets. With the exception of digital assets, which I'm not going to discuss at this point, three key chickens are cash, property, and shares. There's very rarely anywhere else that you can actually invest, with the exception of jewelry or, antiques or those sorts of things. Most other things will fit into cash, property, and shares. If you are a business owner, if you own your own business, you are a shareholder. You're 100% shareholder, potentially, of your own company, your own business. If you own BHP shares, you're a shareholder. If you own a rental property, you're a property holder. If you own a farm, if you're a farmer, you may have both a property asset, which is the actual farm, and you may have a shareholding, which is the business of running the farm. So wherever you choose to invest, whether it's in your own name or it's in superannuation, you typically have the choice of which chickens you want to buy, cash, property, and shares. Where our industry or profession has fallen afoul in the past is that a lot of the direction as to which chickens you should be buying used to be kind of driven by which chickens paid the advisor the most money. Where was there a kickback or an incentive? If you go and talk to a real estate agent about their chickens, they're not going to recommend anytime soon that you go and buy shares or managed funds. That's not going to happen. And oftentimes when you go and talk to a financial advisor, yes, they'll probably be more aligned to shares or managed funds or whatever their particular bent is. So our challenge to you as wealth hunters is to go out there and actually learn about the different types of chickens that are available, but to recognize that every chicken is important and there is a role for property, cash, and shares for everybody all the time. There's not one of those that is more important than the other. The big distinction is what is the actual purpose of those assets, and does that purpose align with your purpose over time? Big example of that, and I hear this all the time, particularly in Australia. It's a very, very Australian approach, and that is, well, if I could own 2 or 3 rental properties outright by the time I retire, well, that's it. That's the plan, and I'm going to earn enough income on those properties to live a brilliant lifestyle, because people can look at the eggs that are being laid and say, well, hang on, if I'm getting $500 a week from those properties, that's $1,500 a week. That's enough to live on. That's going to be fantastic, without realizing that you're telling me this plan now in your 40s. You can't retire, or you're not going to retire until you're in your mid-60s. So there's a 25-year time frame ahead of you. That There are expenses that come along with that asset. So you've got things like rates and insurance all the time. You've got maintenance on that property all the time. You've then also got to remember that that property is going to be 25 years older because you're going to be 25 years older. And so roofs need replacing after 20 years. Painting needs to be done. Air conditioners have got a 7-year time frame. Hot water systems have got a 6 or 7 year time frame. And so if you then look at that as an asset and go, well, hang on a second, am I really going to net $1,500 a week in income at the end of it? And is that really the right purpose? Or could there be another purpose for that asset? And of course there is. The purpose for property is also the fact that it's a safe place to store equity. Another conversation for another day. But my point of that is, don't just automatically go to your default understanding of what you think the purpose of that asset is. Think critically about every asset that's available to you and say, hang on a second. In reality, how does this tactic, this buying of this particular asset, which has these number of purposes, actually align with my purpose and my time frame? And if you can make that equation work, if you can make those things stack up and you purchase the right chickens over time with the right purpose in mind, then you are going to be 4/5 of the way to actually achieving your stated outcome. And that is super important over time.
We are Life Sumo. lifesumo.com.au